How did the desert get spruce wood? What really happened with the villager shipment? Where did these frogs come from? The questions nobody wants the answer to. Just kidding, literally everybody wants it. So, this is the Stories of Our Minecraft World, a collection of short stories left out of the main series. Hope you enjoy. Where better to start than with the cute little guys that started it all? That takes us back, all the way back, before the formation of the Emirate and the Republic as we know them. After a long period of inactivity following the fall of Agrios, new players have risen to create a new city at the world spawn called New Bravos. The highly anticipated Swamp update had just released, introducing, among other things, the frog. It was Zipper's idea to get frogs for their new city. With the limited resources of the time, it was decided the easiest way to explore would be to travel by river. And of course we can see this river-centric mentality is still used today and is also reflected in the Explorers Guild map. Keep in mind that at this point Raine and the Becklands hadn't even been discovered yet. They began by sailing up the Norris River to the area now occupied by the EDC terracotta mines. This brought them to a river junction, splitting into 4 main waterways going off into the desert. They eventually decided to continue north through the dunes, avoiding the larger Barrens region. This proved to be a wise decision, as it wasn't long before they came upon the northern sea coast, marked by this tall forest column, and behind it, the coastal swamps. A classical swamp biome, bounded on both sides by mangrove. With his netherite tools, Zippers quickly dug a trench connecting the river to the swamps, and the two began exploring by boat. It turned out this small mountain was only the beginning of new and interesting generation, as the swamps themselves were bordered on both sides by the jawbone and the spikes. This expedition would mark their discovery and their first documentation. After searching all along the coastal swamps, the two weren't able to find any frogs, and I'm actually not sure how they accomplished that because I saw one almost immediately when I was collecting screenshots. The extra irony here is that this swamp area naturally spawns orange frogs, but anyway, having been unable to find any, they decided to expand their search and sail into the Northern Ocean. This is the biggest of the oceans, and the two sailed into the unknown. After days of nothing but water, storms, and crashing waves, a small island came into view. Along with a regular forest and sparse jungle, they found dense mangrove swamps. Accounts differ, but the two seem to have spent around 5 days on the island, which they named Little Iceland, mostly for its resemblance to actual Iceland. Looking around, we can still see evidence of their presence, like this abandoned boat, signs of mud excavation, a creeper hole, and this dirt and sandstone dwelling. The center of Little Iceland harbors small open fields, home to a few wild horses. Zippers and Branded were as surprised as anyone to find them here. Believe it or not, this was actually the first recorded encounter with horses since the time of Old Agrios. That's right, you thought this was a frog origin, but it's also a horse origin. Two each grabbed a horse, and they built this little structure to keep them in while they searched the island for frogs. And frogs they did find. After securing the animals, they spent half a day collecting resources, including mangrove pustules, mangrove wood, roots, and mud. And then it was time to head home. They found 2 frogs, one for each boat, and well, the horses, they got the old lead treatment. A long journey and a couple wet horses later, they returned to their new settlement. Both sides built stables to accommodate the horses, who remain there to this day. They also bred the frogs in the Norris River, so that each player could take home 2. Branded's frogs were leashed outside the river villa, and sadly one has since escaped. On the other side of the river, Zippers planted a mangrove tree and made a small pond area. Even today this tree stands in the city of Tanis, and you can find the Emirates frogs Lenny and Freud named by a player called Rose. On the subject of Rose, there are and have been some players who join the world and only played once or only log on every once in 4 months or so. To keep the main series simple, they were omitted. Such is the case of a player named Cheeto. The little brother of one of the players wanted to see the world for himself, having watched his older sibling play many times. After many a plea, he was invited into Tanis and directed to the Affordable Housing District for the Fresh Spawn, more commonly referred to as the Undercity. Some players of the Emirate didn't trust Cheeto, as he didn't waste too much time wandering into player homes and opening up any chests and barrels that he came across. Sadly for Cheeto, his eagerness to explore would soon get the better of him. If only he had heeded the warning signs. Mild spoiler warning for lore 4 and 5, but those who've seen it will be familiar with this deal between Dragon, CEO of the East Desert Company, and Highfish High Castle, Lord of the Black Keep, to set up an iron farm on Raine. Now, in the main series, I said that the villagers were spirited away from the trade hall into the cover of darkness and delivered to the island. Simple, right? Well, in reality, that's not quite how it went down. The actual voyage to the Southlands went well. It was just everything else. When pushing one cart from the trade hall, it was supposed to go on this new sidetrack, dropping the villager into the shipping canal. However, the switch track had accidentally been set the wrong way, sending the passenger off towards Soto, a completely unlit rail line at night. Dragon hopped into his own cart and gave chase, but ultimately this probably cost him. The carts bumped into a creeper on the tracks, which promptly exploded. In the middle of the dunes, there was no escape from the wandering husks. Quite a fumble, but it was only the beginning. After switching the track, 2 more villagers were brought to the ships, and those ships were sailed to Marine without issue. Rather than deliver them to the Black Keep right away, Dragon decided to store them in the Acacia Tower until Highfish could provide proof of payment. In an effort to conceal them, he dug this tunnel into the tower basement, and one of the villagers was pushed into the wall by the flowing water and suffocated. So, back to the trade hall, collect another, and finally, 2 villagers stored safely in the basement. Now Dragon only had to wait for the high castles. Or so he thought. While doing whatever it is that Crow does, he encountered a pillager patrol and managed to kill them. Although, not understanding actual pillager mechanics, he returned to the tower with the bad omen effect active. This spawned a raid on the tower, causing pillagers to descend on him from all sides. Somehow, miraculously, the king survived this encounter with only iron armor and a stone sword. This actually got me thinking, is Crow him? Well, the king escaped alive, but the villagers in the basement weren't so lucky. So later, when Sparrow told Dragon that half of the wool had been collected, he came to the tower and discovered empty boats and had a very reasonable crash out and went to replace them yet again. This time, they were brought directly to the Black Keep and the safety of the wall, and well, you're not gonna believe this. After yet another wall suffocation and a heated argument, Dragon was forced to get a replacement, but made it clear that this was the last time. The pent-up frustration from this complete disaster probably encouraged the soon-to-follow destruction of Marine's villager room, orchestrated by Dragon himself. Remember, he got himself 32 diamonds out of that, which he probably saw as fair compensation for his delivery troubles. The Trident, the sigil of the Northern Kingdom and the preferred weapon of most Northerners. But how did the Trident become so revered as a symbol of unity? Well, from the Trident King, of course. But how did he get his name? We've touched on it before, but this is the full story. In the early days, before Brace was a kingdom, it was barely even a city, a small settlement on the river at the edge of the world. The first nights were tough, supplies were low. The camp was set upon in the night by Drowned from the river. When all hope seemed lost, Quote stepped forward with only an iron axe. When 3 Trident Drowned attacked him at once, he defied the odds, not only surviving, but securing 3 consecutive Trident drops. This became a rather famous event throughout the frontier, with players who didn't know Quote referring to him as the Trident Guy. This was the beginning of a reputation Quote would solidify when he became the king. When Brace as a kingdom began to form, so too did their culture. They decided on the system that you can learn about in our cultures video, where the northern lords would fight an attorney to crown the king, and that lord's city would become the capital. The crowning tourney was held in a separate world, with each contestant getting equal prep time and resource access. Quote fought honorably through the bracket, rather effortlessly reaching the final fight. His opponent, Lord Sifos of Ravengard. The two seemed evenly matched and clashed for quite some time. Hoping to continue his lucky streak, Quote opted for tridents as his ranged attack, while Sifos preferred quick draws from a bow. Both fighters blocked the other's projectiles with shields. When these ranged attacks failed on both sides, Sifos got aggressive and pushed forward, forcing Quote to change his strategy, and ultimately make one of his career-defining plays. Using a knockback 2 sword, Sifos was getting hits on Quote, while also throwing him too far back to land a counter hit. Rushing his opponent, Quote quickly placed an end crystal, but Sifos was quick to knock him back. However, this was exactly what Quote planned for. As he flew backwards, he launched a trident mid-air, which sailed past Sipho's head and detonated the crystal behind him. This explosion threw the Lord of Ravengard forward and straight into the prongs of another trident, which, quote, buried deep into his chest, clutching the wind. Victory in the tournament made, quote, king, and Riversteel became the capital. This trident play secured the king's legendary status in the north and his position as one of the world's greatest fighters. To honor their king, the northern houses took the trident as their sigil, and it can be seen flying in all northern cities today. This concludes the first episode of the Stories of Our Minecraft World. I hope you enjoyed, and if you're new here, consider dropping a like, subscribing, and if you're not new, don't forget to check out my community tab for posts and polls. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.